Welcome, everyone. And for those of you that are new to the Connection Partners and new to the Florida Network, I thought I'd just say, I think you're safe. And who are the Connection Partners? And I'm Sharon Joy, and I dreamed up this wild idea, and I keep doing that. And who else from the Connection Partners is here? If you'll please say hello and what your gift is.
I'm Linda, and I'm been a journalist for almost 30 years. And I write about consciousness and about healthy lifestyles in a magazine called Natural Awakenings.
Thank you. Douglas?
Yeah, I'm Douglas Bonar, live in Largo, Florida, and have been co-conspiring with Sharon Joy for about 25 or 30 years or so. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and did my graduate research on altered states of consciousness 41 years ago. I just recently retired. So just keenly interested in this subject matter, and I'm complete.
And I guess the other one, Bob, and for now, that's the Connection Partners.
Hi, everyone.
Bob?
Greetings from warm but I'm sure sunny but cold South Florida. At least for me, it is. Yes, I've been involved in the study of consciousness since my 20s, and I spent 26 years collaborating and working with Edgar Mitchell, and we'll have more to say about that in a bit. But anyways, welcome everybody.
Happy to see you all. And just to remind you from the instigator, who's not here, Mike McDonald, one of our playmates in this Florida sandbox, and he sent this invitation out on Thanksgiving Eve, and I quickly responded. Here's his comment that I'll repeat. It is in the invitation. Perhaps humanity is a proto-conscious is a proto-conscious state in which the evolution of intelligence is growing into a super-organism in which carbon-based bipeds are no longer useful in the destiny of biological life as we have known it in the past 100 plus millennia. So just so you know, that was the provocateur. And we're guided by ION's founder, Edgar Mitchell's last mission to give human consciousness the means to discover itself. So some of you, again, new to us, the Connection Partners and the Florida Network, I thought it'd give you a little bit of a flow. Will be this just a taste. 90 minutes is hardly going to get us into more than enticements, but we will experience. That's our intention, to actually experience a growing oneness, collective intelligence, and emergence. So that's the direction. And again, Mike's question, individual human consciousness, humanity's consciousness as a superorganism, and collective intelligence. And we're known to go way off course because we nurture emergence, just to let you know. But our Connection Partners this year is looking to extend our experiment in 3 topics from Nobel Prize winners on entanglement, which this is, complex adaptive systems, and equity. So just so you know, in our explorations, part of what is happening is a request to each of you that you be as present as possible. And that means all of us present in the room. If you have to leave, we'll send you the recording. And if you need to drop off, come back in. But what we've learned is being present is really key in this cultivating fields, as some of you have already experienced. The Connection Partners incorporated in 1995, and we've been playing around ever since. So, excuse me. First with Suncoast Community Ions, then Hillsborough tomorrow. We got into Tampa Bay, and then Florida, the Florida Ions, Susan Davis and Ken's, and then we did an experiment with the MIT Presencing Institute on transformational Society using St. Petersburg. These last 5 years, we've been experimenting with Fritjof Capra every Monday and what's become the Florida Network. And we've learned how systems are becoming conscious. And now more recently, how networks are becoming conscious. So the mission of the Connection Partners is to demonstrate how love can transform communities. And our vision is a more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. So I think that's enough of a background. And so, Linda, please give us a moment of your centering, if you will.
Okay. I'm going to read a poem by Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Bengali poet, writer, and painter who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. This poem captured my attention the first time I heard it read 30 years ago. It's one of those things that stuck in my head. It recited by Deepak Chopra. So first of all, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths. Keeping your eyes closed, let go of your interior dialogue and be still without movement. This poem is called The Stream of Life. The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death in ebb and flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of ages dancing in my blood this moment.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank
welcome.
you each and all for your presence and your faces, your beautiful selves, your eyes. We see into each other's discovery of soul. That's one of the things I didn't mention with the Connection Partners. We are very much a spiritual group of collaborators, listeners who are guided by the sciences and try our best to remember who we are as human beings. And Bob Steritz, our, if you want to give this distinction, our expert in consciousness, if there is such a thing. Bob, thank you for taking the floor and giving us your whiz of an overview of the Connection Partners kind of worldview of consciousness. And first, if you will, anything you want us to know more about yourself before you begin?
Well, yeah, let me do that on the first slide. Am I set to share out my screen?
You are open to share.
Okay. Okay. I actually had a presentation that I was working on for something else. And when I heard about this meeting, I decided that it was maybe appropriate to repurpose it for this meeting. So if anybody is interested in a hard copy, I am going to put a link. I guess I'll do that as soon as the presentation is over. Douglas, perhaps you can remind me in case I forget, but the link is actually on this first slide. The link points to a folder that has 2 files in it. I think both might be appropriate if you're interested. Okay. Why do I want to give this presentation? Basically to facilitate a discussion on the nature of consciousness. I'm sure everybody has a different background, and it's important to establish a common baseline so we can have a common understanding of what some of the topics and some of the issues are. So this presentation, which I do not intend to give today, except for the first 6 slides or so, is a high-level overview of the state of the art in the science of consciousness. If anybody is interested in the whole thing, I could spend 15 minutes on each slide. So way beyond the scope of today's meeting. So we could schedule another time to go through the whole thing if anybody's interested. Basically, I'd like to raise awareness of the issues, some of the issues, some of the implications, and possible future actions to take. One thing I'd like to begin with, a warning. Some of what is contained in my presentation will probably challenge some of your long-held beliefs. I know when I first graduated from my formal education program, I was an unthinking materialist because like most people, I was so enculturated by society. I never questioned fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. And it took me a long time to understand that things are very different than what I was led to believe or what I took for granted without ever thinking about it. You know, beliefs are kind of an interesting thing. There's a little story that about Albert Einstein. He had a horseshoe in his house, and a visitor, upon seeing the horseshoe, asked him, "Do you believe in luck?" And Einstein's response was, "No, I don't, but I understand that it works anyway." So that's one of the interesting things about beliefs. Nature is what nature is, and nature will do what nature wants, regardless of what we believe we think it does. So, and I don't expect anybody to immediately, on faith, take my view of what I'm about to present. But as somebody trained in science and engineering, I need empirical evidence. I need facts. I need proof to the best that I can obtain it before I am willing to accept anything as truth. So my intention with this presentation is to give you the latest in terms of scientific discoveries in multiple fields of why what I'm about to tell you may in fact be something that we need to look at very closely and take seriously. So one more thing, just to give you a little bit of an overview. Why is a change in perspectives urgently needed? I think most of you know this. Basically, until the mid-19th century, everything we needed to know to survive and thrive could be learned by the ripe old age of 6. You know, how to tend the crops, how to take care of the animals, how to build furniture, how to build fires, things like that. Unfortunately, the knowledge of the world, our instincts and our beliefs no longer serve us well because we live in a world that's changing extremely rapidly. And instead, our instincts and our beliefs, the way we operate by default, act to our detriment, not to our benefit. So I'm sure most of you realize that most of our traditions and institutions are based on knowledge and understanding that is woefully out of date. We have continuous growth in a finite system that's unsustainable. Today, our understanding of the reality we're living in through our sciences and our metaphysics is incomplete. It has a long way to go, and the experiences within our reality are real, but many of our interpretations of what we experience may not be so real or appropriate. So let me just jump to the next one. If you have a problem, before you can solve it, you have to know you have a problem. And in the age of misinformation, it's becoming more and more difficult. But one of Einstein's, my favorite quotes of his is, "You can't solve a problem with the same kind of thinking that got you into the problem in the first place." And Carl Jung It all depends on perspectives, how we look at things, not how they are in themselves. It's a change in perspective, which was what led Edgar Mitchell to totally change his life upon his return from his trip to the moon. And in the early 1600s, Rene Descartes said the only one thing any of us can be absolutely sure of is I am conscious, therefore I am, I exist. So I'd like to start with the 10,000-foot view. I'm only going to go through 2 or 3 more slides to try to give you the motivation of why this presentation is important and why you should really look at some of the underlying beliefs that you may be carrying around and not realize it. There's an old saying that goes, when you're up to your ass in alligators, don't forget that your original intention was to drain the swamp. So before we get into the details, it might be appropriate to look at things from a little bit of a higher perspective. And I'd like to back up to the beginning of the 20th century with the founding fathers of modern quantum theory. One of the things they notice in studying reality at that fundamental level is that you couldn't get away from consciousness. Consciousness seemed to affect the results of measurements. But they didn't know what to do with that for the most part. They came up with a few ideas, but the prevailing rule of the day was forget about consciousness, just shut up and compute. There was nothing else that was done with consciousness in any kind of a formal way in the West until 1973. And that was a result of Edgar Mitchell's experience in space and seeing the perspective of Earth from deep space, 250,000 miles away. The epiphany he had on his return trip led him to found the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Okay, the year after that, in 1974, Thomas Nagel wrote a seminal paper on what is it like to be a bat. And that legitimized the study of consciousness. 20 years later, the Journal of Consciousness Studies published its first issue, and it's been publishing ever since. The next year, in 1995, David Chalmers, in his seminal work, defined the hard problem of consciousness. And those 2 papers by Nagel and Chalmers led to active debates all over the place about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness. In the present day, for people who really understand the issues and know what the latest discoveries from science are telling us, know that the debates are pretty much settled. Physicalism, which its former name was materialism, is dead. Unfortunately, we have a tremendous inertia in society. Most people follow one of the precepts of materialism, that consciousness is a result totally of brain processes. And when the brain dies, the consciousness dies, and that's the end of it. Unfortunately, that's not the case, as our brothers familiar with the Eastern traditions have been trying to tell us for the last 3,000 years. Okay, so this is a result of the conclusion of the information that I'm going to give you. The first bullet, major bullet on the top, the prevailing worldview, is the one that's still enculturated. For most people, it's assumed by default. Consciousness ends at bodily death. Life has no meaning or purpose. The name of the game is consumption and accumulation of material resources. He who gets the most wins. The prevailing worldview encourages individualism and separation, promotes nihilism and an Epicurean lifestyle, and the materialist view solved one of the problems, at least for people who didn't take religions, exactly as the understanding of the true nature of reality. The church ruled Western Europe, and most of the world for 1,500 years based on the fear of death and what happened to the body when we died. And the other major religions weren't far behind in their controlling of human civilization. The emerging worldview, based on all the scientific discoveries from multiple disciplines and many, many other fields of study, tell us a totally different story. They tell us that consciousness is a substrate for all reality, and it's unbounded by space and time. What is learned and experienced in our lifetimes is never lost. And because of that, it restores meaning and purpose to the human condition, because there is only oneness and entanglement. This worldview promotes empathy, altruistic behavior, and the sanctity of life. It provides a much better understanding of the full human experience. And in a very practical level, it also provides a totally new model of wellness, one that promotes and endorses mind-body interactions.
Perfect. Thank you. Who wants to jump in?
Well, I'll jump in if nobody else is. Should I go ahead?
Oh, absolutely. You don't ask, you jump.
Okay, well, I would like to bring the question that I just posed to my two breakout room partners, Sharon Joy and Joe, to the group. Thank you, Bob, so much. I really loved your presentation, what you had to say to spark all kinds of reflection and thinking. The engineering mind that you have, the respect for the evidence, really, in what you've amassed for the evidence is compelling, because there is a lot of evidence out there. But I wonder, what spurred you to get curious about this? And the reason I say that is because I did a research project on materialist scientists, and they represented a continuum of staunch materialists, people who even had premonitions in their dreams at night, but still rejected anything that was not physical. And then people who were materialists, but now are post-materialists. And I asked them the question, what either keeps you as a materialist, or what led you to come over to this other side of being open to the non-physical? And the answer was two things. It was either that they started contemplating their own existence, why am I here? Who am I? What does it mean? Or they had a situation in a personal relationship. So something of the heart, whether it was good or bad. And so I would love to ask you, if it's okay, to kind of delve into, even though you are a scientific person with a scientific mind and seeking the evidence, was there any catalyst for you of a personal nature that led you to this?
Okay, great question. I'll answer that in a minute, but I personally know Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience. And he was a hardcore materialist also, until he had the experience. There's no better way of knowing than having an actual experience. And I'd like to point out one other person. I realize you probably can't read the title of this book, Then I Am Myself, the World. This is a book that was recently published by Christoph Koch. He's the chief scientist of the Allen Institute for Brain Studies. Towering intellect, brilliant guy, known all over the world for the research that he's done of brain studies. Hardcore materialist. Had an epiphany or a transcendent experience on the beach while he was in Brazil. Now he's a hardcore idealist. So there's nothing better than experience. I guess I could say that I had an epiphany also when I was 22 years old, because I remember laying in bed, resting right after final exams, looking up at the ceiling fan twirling around over my head, thinking to myself, there's got to be more than this. Why am I here? What's the nature of reality? What's the nature of consciousness? Is it really going to disappear when I die? And that led me on a lifelong quest to understand it. And of course, working with Edgar Mitchell for all those years, I once gave a paper to Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona, and asked him to do a peer review on the paper that was about to be published by Edgar and I in a scientific journal. And he happened to ask me a question: "Is what is it like to work for Edgar?" And I told him my thoughts, and then he made a comment to me. Working with Edgar is probably like going to MIT and receiving a PhD in consciousness studies and then doing a postdoc besides. And I have to say that it's really true, because once you get so intimately familiar with the subject, you empathize with it in a way that can't be described in words. And everybody that I've talked about who really has been studying the nature of consciousness, I mean, almost everybody has pretty much come to the same conclusion, that consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality, and there's an aspect of our consciousness that is infinite, that lasts forever. So I hope that answers your question, but
Thank you.
that's
Thanks
pretty-
Thank
very
you.
much.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to
Provocateurs?
bring in one aspect of this, in that we look for the scientific proof and all that, but some of the proof is intuitive. We're talking about love and all that we find proof of it through our own intuitive nature, through just our loving, our kindness, our compassion, and all that, rather than the empirical process, only empirical, that if we see it, if it's proven in science. So I'd like us to all to keep our hearts open to that field of compassion and love as part of this endeavor of what is consciousness. Thank you.
If I may, thank you, Bob. Two quick things. I do want to underline what Douglas just said. I find the scientific method is reductionistic, and yet empathy, consciousness, etc., are just the opposite. They move in the opposite direction. They're ever expanding, they're ever embracing, and etc. And so the modalities, the technologies that are created by the two different thought forms work in very different ways that don't necessarily know how to affirm what the other is doing, if that makes sense. But the other thing, as a religionist, my understanding of religion is that we all have to give an account for what we do with our consciousness. Political institutions then use religious symbols and fear for domination and power. That's a misunderstanding of true religion, whatever form it is, whether it's indigenous religions or more traditional kinds of things. And so this question of how do we account for our consciousness is also a question about how do we account for what we do with it? What are we doing with our awareness in the world? What's the ethic behind it? How does it expand upon itself, our relationships with other people, the love that Douglas was just talking about, etc. But then how does it also come to understand that we're an emergent form of that which is the sort of the core of living systems that have, that are integral to whatever the universe is, and we have to give some account for that to ourselves and then to the larger phenomenon in which we live. And there are numerous ways of doing that. And so one can't be totalitarian about which way we give an account. But I think we all have that yearning as part of the yearning, the belonging, and etc. So being, consciousness, joy, etc. Those are sort of fundamental across the religious landscape.
Thank
Yeah,
you
well,
so much, Russell.
just let me respond to Russell. I just want to make one comment.
Okay.
Whether you're a scientist, a poet, or a carpenter, the one thing we all have in common is our consciousness.
Right.
And that's all
Exactly.
there is to it.
Yeah. And it's how the field the richer we can nourish the field in which we have it, the greater connectivity, to use that word, with connection partners we experience.
Yeah.
This has been so rich. I feel my sweet teeth are tingling and want more. And specifically, Angelina, how wonderful that you were able to stay up into the middle of the night. What is it, 11:30, midnight on the other side of the planet?
Yes.
Let us just hear a hello from this planet Earth that we can't see right now.
Yes,
Just
hello
any
from
reflections from you.
Kyrgyz Republic. I actually that's really interesting, and it's very amazing. And I'm psychologist, but I also teach Aikido. And when we were in these breaking rooms, I was telling that for me it's really complicated to define the consciousness. So martial arts says, oh, no consciousness, like spirit, and something that kind of lies beyond this consciousness. Psychology, especially Soviet psychology, yes, we were discussing, tells us, oh, consciousness, it's like rational, it's a main thing, and etc. So it's very interesting just to be here and experience. I mean,
well, I know you
Thanks.
found us through the Capra course, as like the
Yes.
Capra course is global. Some of our conversations are from people in other countries and other way different time zones. So the first time we've been able to bring you in, it's wonderful to see you. And now I have to shift the conversation, which I so love, to introduce one of my wonderful, most hospitable gentlemen who's also brilliant. It's Roger Nelson. Roger was there at the Princeton lab in the basement of the engineering school, where Brenda, Jeff's mom, and Bob always were so welcome and curious and brought extra chairs in the room. And Roger was always there to be, again, his welcoming, hospitable self. And through these, I don't know, decades now, he's continued to be a willing responder and again, quite a challenging thinker. He not only thinks outside of the box. I've not found Roger to declare there is one. And
There's no
then
box.
more particularly, he's going to tell us in his short time a little bit about his own experiences. But it was Roger's research with the random event generators in the Global Consciousness Project, which he started in 1998, that really provoked my interest, because again, I've been interested in human entanglement and our ability to experience and be one. So Roger was one of those pot stirrers, as I think of us. Roger, if you'd like to introduce yourself in a more specific way, and certainly let's hear from you.
Well, I've been given 5 minutes in which to summarize 45 years of research.
What the heck?
So I won't spend a whole lot of time introducing myself, but I'll tell you, working in the Pear Lab with Bob and Brenda was quite a trip, a wonderful, not just one experience, a wonderful set of experiences, most of which had to do with consciousness. But I think I probably have to confess at the beginning that I'm looking at consciousness in a kind of, as a kind of object in a way. So in a sense, I'm trying to say, to find out what consciousness is by way of asking what it can do, especially if we ask questions at the edges of what we know. So I'm going to start by mentioning the RNG or REG, random number generator, that many of you have heard about many times, but I'm not sure anybody knows what exactly they are. My wife says, it's an electronic coin flipper. Yeah, tell them it's a coin flipper. It is. So we're producing long sequences of numbers that are really based on the heads and tails kind of operation of a random device based on quantum stuff, and it is really random. So these devices we used in the laboratory first to ask the question, what if I intend to get more high numbers when I'm asked to pay attention to this machine? What if I intend to get low numbers? Does that matter? It turns out that it does. We were able to show very clearly, and by the way, we're not alone, although I think probably the Paralab experiments on random number generator flexibility or vulnerability to consciousness may have been the longest running and probably the most precise and scientifically grounded research. In any case, we found that people's intention mattered. And we very soon, that is to say, after we made very small devices, began to take them out into the field because we became interested in group consciousness. What happens if a group of people come together in a kind of resonant and coherent way? What if the group really becomes a group? So we brought random number generators into situations where people were participating in a ritual together or attending a concert that was just fabulously engaging for everybody. Or we also took what we thought of as control data by taking the same device to a place where there's no order or coherence apparent, place like a bus station or a street corner. And the difference is remarkably clear and strong. When we are coherent, we create something that registers in the data from a random number generator. And you might readily imagine that these results like that made us think about, what are the limitations or what else is possible? So I began thinking of global consciousness. That's a really big group. And did some pilot kind of studies, found that there was promise. So I called upon friends and colleagues around the world to host nodes in a global network of random number generators. So that became the instrument that was the basis of what we call the Global Consciousness Project. It was first called the EGG Project for EGG because my son, who did a lot of the fundamental programming, said, what you're doing is something like an EEG, but instead of a bunch of electrodes on a scalp, you have random number generators spread around the globe. And then we proceeded with a very well-defined experiment, which basically said, if people if tremendous numbers of people are engaged by an event in the world, we should expect our data to change, maybe very slightly, but ultimately detectably. And that's what we found. Over a formal experiment that had 500 little experiments in it, the composite across all of those experiments asking that same fundamental question, does our data change if people come together in a coherent and resonant way? The answer, again, was yes. And for those of you who pay attention to scientific terminology, the result is strong at the level of 7 sigma. It's more than 7 sigma, which is more than 7 standard deviations from chance expectation. that there's just no likelihood, with odds of 1 in a trillion, 1 in 3 trillion, that this could happen by chance. So in other words, the composite result across all of our studies over 17 years was a 1 in a trillion kind of probability. So what does this mean? I think it means that there is a global consciousness, a kind of form, maybe in a formative stage, maybe embryonic. I sometimes hope that it's actually a teenager already, because we have work to do as to keep this planet viable for human beings to enjoy. So I didn't mention it, but one of the early inspirations, long before I even came to Princeton in 1980, was Teilhard de Chardin, whose several books are just remarkably beautiful, poetic expressions of what the human being is and what consciousness is, really. And he said that he wrote about evolution. He said that we sometimes think we're the pinnacle of evolution, but he said, maybe not. There seems to be another stage. And I think that we are now approaching that another stage, which is to become the kind of intelligence for the earth, what he called the noosphere. Most of you probably know that word. It means a sheath of intelligence for the world. I think that is our destiny. I'm an eternal optimist. I imagine that we actually will make it there, but we have work to do. And it's very lovely to see so many people out there interested in doing that work. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Roger, thank you so much for taking the accordion in these moments, bringing them closer together. And we'll have other occasions. Thank you so much. And my friend Jeff, my newer friend Jeff, because I've been hearing about Jeff from his mom at the Princeton lab for so long. And I guess if you bring people into a belief before they're 6 or 7, they're hooked. Isn't that what the Jesuits said?
Yeah.
And Jeff, wasn't that you? Weren't you a toddler when you came into the lab there at Pear? And then the rest, as they say, is history. So Jeff is my new friend, and I am just so thrilled that we met when we did. And I will also add that besides growing up by osmosis, picking up on Pear, Jeff has his own leadership and direction. And again, I'll let him introduce himself, but I find his willingness to jump into the playfulness and to question beyond what they did at Princeton has been just most refreshing. And one of those, it was to convene about 12 of us at his home up in Roanoke, outside of Roanoke, a consciousness alliance. And again, like the Connection Partners, we're not a business as such, but we're sharing our discoveries and delighting and supporting each other. So having said that, Jeff, let me see if I can bring you up like I forgot to do with Roger. Speak, Jeff. There he is.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, you're all on my screen at the same time, so I'm seeing you all. The Yeah, thanks. I will say I was a little older than a toddler, perhaps. I was
Okay.
when all that started, I was about 11 or 12, so
Right.
it doesn't quite qualify at toddler age. But of course, those are conversations that were going on before even Pear started, and my mother and I have very similar personalities, and so we would have a lot of interesting conversations over the years. Um, the Kind of carrying on, Roger gave such a fantastic summary of all these things that I don't want to repeat any of what he said. Um, the Near the end, as Bob and Brenda were looking at retirement age, and Roger as well, uh, asking, well, what's next in all of this? They stood up an organization that I now run called the International Consciousness Research Laboratories. and intended to carry on this work. The the distinction between what PEAR did and what ICRL is now doing is that ICRL is a little bit broader in scope. It does a little bit less of the research, but it's not to say no research. Fortunately, there are a lot of organizations that are doing this, as Roger mentioned, and it allows for my organization to sort of expand the scope. Yes, let us continue to study what these effects are and what kinds of impacts, for example, our intentionality can have on a random event generator or any other system with some level of entropy in it. Um, but ideally, to ask, how do we take that now and turn it into an impact? Make tomorrow, as this is sort of the phrase that I had used in one of our earlier breakout sessions, make tomorrow a little bit better than today based on what we know, right? And as we continue to learn, to continue that process, we understand ourselves, consciousness and ourselves, and we use that to somehow improve the world around us. And that really is the focus for ICRL. There's a lot of things that we do in this respect. It is, as Sharon Joy mentioned, the networking, this Consciousness Alliance. We've got about 20, 25 organizations now that are part of this in one form or another, to try to work synergistically, right? Because just like you can shine a whole lot of light bulbs on something, it's not quite the same as shining a laser on it. We want to get coherent with each other and allow every organization to be more effective. So that kind of networking and changing the way that we function is a big part of this. Um, and part of that as well is learning, or I should say, training ourselves to an effective way of thinking about things. And so, again, 5 minutes is not a lot of time to introduce anything. So, out of the millions of different things I could say, there are a lot of different things that ICRL is doing, and by all means, check out our website, which is like circa 1740. It's terrible what we're working on revitalizing it, but you'll see some of the initiatives that are trying to bring people together to do different things. But if there was one thing that I would bring up now for us to think about is, are we are we really understanding ourselves and the questions that we ask in an effective way? Because the questions drive everything. And one of the biggest challenges with research into consciousness, research into psi effects, all these different things, is often the way that we structure our questions dictates the answers that we get. The principle that is, if you're into quantum mechanics, you're going, yeah, of course, right? It's all over the place, and so often we fool ourselves into thinking that we're moving forward when in reality our questions have undermined our end goal. I'll give you an example of this. One of my particular favorite topics is understanding the nature of time. And many people that I talk to, and including myself, are coming to feel that time is much more likely a cognitive tool that consciousness uses in organizing the universe, rather than some objectively existing property of the universe that confines us in a particular way, which is great. And I'm on that page too. But then in those conversations, I'll talk to people about, okay, well, time is not fundamental, it's this, or the other. And then we'll get into, well, yeah, but we still have to talk about causality and we still need to talk about past lives. You go, but you just said time is a cognitive construct. If time is not an absolute construct, what do you mean by causality? What do you mean by past lives as opposed to future lives or concurrent lives or anything else, right? We're not self-consistent in the questions that we ask. And so it's a very difficult journey because we're tied to the language that we were brought up with. So if there's anything that I would bring up today, and again, I use this only as one example, as we talk about these topics, as we go through presentations and we're giving presentations, we're listening to presentations or having conversations, whatever the case may be, we always need to focus and ask ourselves, are our questions presuming something that is going to keep us from getting to the answer? And I'll sort of get off the stage with what I consider to be one of the most famous and yet damaging questions that was brought up in all of this, was Chalmers' so-called hard question of consciousness, which is saying essentially, by what mechanism is it that the brain can manifest consciousness, presumes in the nature of the question that the brain manifests consciousness. And so to even pursue the question could very well, I believe, eliminate the possibility of you finding a reasonable answer, because
Yeah.
it's founded on something that's fundamentally not actually accurate. And so as we talk about these things, always look at your own assumptions, question the way that you think about and phrase these questions to make sure that you're being effective. And I believe that in doing so, we will actually use an understanding of consciousness to make ourselves better, and consequently everything else as well. And I'll stop there.
Oh, Jeff, thank you. You'll notice that I didn't cut either one of you all out at 5 minutes. I think I gave each of you 10 minutes. It's just been too rich of a soup. As I said, my sweet teeth are all aglow. Thank you so much. And I'm going to welcome back. So our friends, Bob, Roger, Jeff, you've brought such gifts. As I asked in the opening, what gifts do we bring to this sandbox here today? And as we get close to the time that we need to depart for the promised 90 minutes, I said it was short. I said it were tapas, tastes of more to come. But let's have an open conversation. Who'd like to jump in and ask Roger or Jeff from their presentations? Any questions, any ponderings, any sparks?
I'd just like to make a comment to Jeff that it's not just time, but also space that's nature's way of organizing experience. It's both. Neither is fundamental in the universe, and I think science is pointing the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think animals are pointing the way, and microorganisms. And the fact that dogs live inside now, and they used to live in the 1960s all outside people's houses, I think they had a conversation and they've moved inside. It's kind of like raccoons know how to how to get into that next garbage can. I'm sure you've seen those experiments. It's sort of like microorganisms connecting trees know when one tree is hurting, and that information about consciousness of plants and microorganisms, that's only really been since 2015 that's been publicized.
Yeah.
So all these things are occurring, and what I question is, how are we going to use global consciousness if we don't define a something? So we were thinking about maybe let's save Greenland as a consciousness thing. You know, why don't we create Greenland as a new paradise?
There you go. But there's an interesting narrative that goes along with that. If you look at all the experiments that Roger is describing, they were done by a wide variety of different people, different ages and backgrounds and so forth. Kids tended to be better at it than adults.
Mm-hmm.
Who is better than kids? Raccoons are really good. Who's better than animals? Plants. Right? When you look at the sophistication of intellect from whatever, it's inverse to your effectiveness at influencing systems using intentionality. That's an interesting observation to make, that if you ask what is it that's going to be ultimately effective in all of this, it's going to be the things that don't trick themselves with their intellect.
Yeah.
To add one more example to that, we have a colleague whose research amount. He's a physician, brain surgeon, I think. Anyway, he has a lot of patients who had suffered serious prefrontal damage to their brains. And he had the idea to try our pair experiments suitably tuned so that people could understand what they're supposed to do. And they did it very well. Some of them with a much larger effect size than fully capable people.
Yeah. The last slide that I presented, I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but was the one that showed the linear projection of consciousness from amoeba on the lower left up to the human, an adult mature human on the right. If you notice, the bottom three items were living beings that do not have a brain, and yet they exhibit conscious behavior. They respond to threats and opportunities in the environment. In the case of amoeba, they even use mud particles in the ponds that they live in and build little houses to protect themselves. So, you know, we really need to redefine what we mean by consciousness, and does it require a brain?
Well, it requires consciousness, which we all have, but at an unconscious level. I usually have, you know, a little longer presentation nowadays in the conversation by promoting the idea of raising unconscious connections that we have. We demonstrate that we have them, but they're unconscious. We don't know them. We don't know how to look at them directly. But what we really should be doing is envisioning and gradually gathering the understanding of how we are connected into our awareness. In other words, the unconscious needs to be made conscious.
There's a lot of evidence that the brain is not the thing that we've historically thought of it as, is this thinking mechanism that does, you know, the neurons fire and that represents thoughts and ideas and whatever, which but when you look at all the evidence of what consciousness is and what we are, it's actually much more likely that the brain is a filter. And in filtering, it actually separates, right? It puts a distinction between ourselves and the rest of the universe. So in that context, it's not actually that surprising that the things with the more evolved brains are probably less connected. Because that's what the brains are doing, is placing a separation, that filter between the two.
You know, Donald Hoffman.
Bob's example is good. The amoebas, they don't have neurons.
I just wanted to make a comment. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to the rest of my presentation, but it requires much more time to go into the detail required. But Donald Hoffman is a neuroscientist doing research at Stanford University. He's been able to show mathematically that if the brain mirrored the states outside in reality, that the entropy requirement or the energy requirements would be so great that the entropy produced would literally fry our brains. So we don't see reality as it actually is. There's a huge reducing filter, and the reducing filter is necessary so we can be aware of what we need to worry about in an environment that, you know, where it's survival of the fittest. Anyways, yeah, go ahead.
This is really short, and yes, it almost feels insulting that I ask for such a small snippet of lifetime of living, passion, research, etc. And TASTE is what we wanted to offer, respecting an hour and a half of people's schedules on a Friday morning. And the connection partners agreed that we will do this 5 more times every other month through the rest of 25. And then in January, whatever that second Friday is, come back together and share what we've learned in a year and a half. And what I encourage is, if I believe everyone's email here, so you will receive, hi David, you will receive the recording. And I invite you, because I will have everybody's email at top, to self-organize, to play amoeba in this sandbox, because there's no way the answers will materialize in a 90-minute TAPA as we've done today. But I have felt tickled and teased and most appreciative of each of you. And Susan, I do want to bring up your leadership with I Am Humanity, because I remember when you were just birthing that a year or so ago, I realized that as humans, we are learning so much, but we can't be humanity without each other. And there you and Mary Ann are on the same screen. And I believe we can't be one without each other. And again, back to the raccoons and the plants and the animals. So in these short minutes left, I invite you each to say whatever you'd like to offer in your farewell and your gratitude, following mine to each one present in this living system. And again, thank you for being present and having your full self in the room. We appreciate that. And David, you will get the recording you're missed, and let's keep in mind there'll be another iteration. So who would like to start? And let's make it popcorn. And with that, we will close.
Okay, let me just make a comment. I put the link to the presentation I gave in the chat box if anybody is interested in downloading a copy of it. So
Just
feel
click
free to
on it.
do it.
No, you should say.
Feel free to use it as you will. And if anybody's interested in exploring this in more detail, I'd be happy to discuss that with you.
Just email. Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm getting some great coaching here from Mary Ann. So I was just completely awestruck with how profound this conversation is and really inspired. So I want to invite you all to the conversation of celebrating humanity for Humanity Day. So I Am Humanity does a global monthly gathering, and our next one's January 18th. And you can find out more information at iamhumanity.net. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can just answer on that website and I will respond.
Thank you, Susan. And put anything in the chat, because that will come with the recording. Thank you. Step up.
I'll go next. All I'm going to say is it's an Ubuntu phrase. I am because we are.
I was going to say namaste.
I was going to say that my mind has been expanded, but now I just want to say my consciousness has been expanded.
I'm curious about one thing. A couple people have just made a comment. They don't see the link in the chat box of the presentation. I sent it to everybody. It says it went out. So if there's an issue, you can email me or let Sharon Joy know, and we'll see that you get a copy.
It didn't go into the chat, Bob. I don't see it.
It does.
Yeah, it did. But if you came in late,
Yeah, I see
if you
it at
came
the
in
top.
late, you didn't get it.
It's there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
there.
there.
Okay, so I guess we'll have to email it then, email the link then.
Sure.
I would
Copy it
also,
again here.
I was just blown away today. But I would love to have Linda's poem, The Poet, and a link for that.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
please.
Thank you.
Got it. Who was waving? Somebody wanted to speak? Thank you.
I was waving goodbye.
Oh,
Love
Bye,
you
Bob.
all.
Bye.
Have a
Thank you
great
so
day.
much.
Thanks for possibility.
And have a bright
Thanks.
future.
Yes.
Very good
Yes.
feature. Yeah, I like it.
Bye.
I have to drop off as well for another call, but it's been a pleasure seeing everybody. And it particularly as a Florida network, we've got a cool event happening in March in Florida. So if you were looking for a really cool consciousness focused retreat, that might be something to check out.
Send me the invitation and I'll send it to everybody who's here.
Right. It's just go on to icrl.org.
Well,
you'll see it in
stick it in the chat, please.
Sorry,
Thank you. Anybody else as a farewell?
get the exact link here.
I just want to say how excited I am being here. My heroes never have been sports people, movie stars. My heroes are the visionaries, the people on this. You are my heroes. We are the ones we've been waiting for, to quote the Hopi elders. This is it, really. So thank you all.
Well, I could contribute a poem if you'd like me.
Oh, please, David.
Let me just get to the right place. I think I'll give you my most recent one, which is on the solstice. I joined two other friends, and we went into a cave, one of the Cathar caves in the side of the hill, down near a place called Ussat-les-Bains. So that's the scene. So it's called Winter Solstice, a Cave Journey. And I put Dag Hammarskjöld's quote at the beginning: "The longest journey is the journey inwards, of those who have chosen their destiny, who have started upon their quest for the source of their being." So here's the poem. Here we gather to sit together, suspended in deep silence, enfolded in a sacred womb, sheltered in earth's embrace, cradling us in her cave of stillness. Here time is steeped in the timeless. We feel into the soft texture of the darkness, past and present merging profoundly, a wafting sense of transcendent peace, charged with numerous resonance, echoing down the distant centuries. Lost in the labyrinth of life, we journey on regardless. Here we can only trust, here we can only surrender, connecting to the inner Christ, anchored within the mountain, treading the winding onward path. The light in our hearts is the light of the world. The shadow in our hearts is the shadow in the world. The lighting of one candle illuminates the whole cave. Here we inch forwards on stony ground, edging steadily out into the daylight, traversing the arduous birth canal, the final staging post, the last gasp of the old year, of our expiring patterns of thought. Here we lunge towards freedom, the blue sky beckoning above. Infused with the power of the Spirit, we can reach beyond the clouds, beyond the storms, beyond our past horizons, even beyond the possible, the so-called practical and realistic. Here we stand clear and tall in truth, putting our firmest stamp on our newly minted world, the once and future kingdom of peace, forging sword and grail into one being together.
David, thank you. It's a gift. We asked that question as we checked in. What gift did we bring? And here you came at the end and brought the perfect gift to send us on our way. Thank you all. This has been a beautiful discovery. And know you can find each other when I send you the recording, and you'll see each other's email. And thank you for your willingness to explore. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.